My mother didn't even lift her head from the Christmas turkey when she dropped that sentence, cold as metal touching bare skin. You need to move out. No warning, no buildup, just a clean cut falling between the blinking tree lights and the steam rising from the meal. The very meal I was the one paying for. My aunt froze, her fork suspended mid-air. My sister stared at her plate as if she hoped it could save her from witnessing any of this. And me, I kept my voice steady, even though something inside me had just snapped completely apart. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, but in my mouth, all I could taste was betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just sat there, realizing I had just been evicted from the very home that, for the past 1 year, every bill, every meal, every glowing light had been kept alive solely because of me. Before I tell you what happened after that moment, tell me where you're watching from. I'll read every comment. And if you've ever been treated like a walking ATM by your own family, hit like and share this story. Because I know exactly how painful it is to be used under the disguise of family love. Now let's go back to the part of the story where my life was always mentioned in the same breath as the bills. 1 year before that Christmas night, I had no idea that a single phone call could pull me back into the same old spiral. An afternoon in Portland fell across the window frame of my small apartment, making me believe I was living in one of those rare, peaceful moments. Raindrops slid into long streaks, casting faint, smoky reflections onto the brick wall. I poured coffee, inhaling the warm, roasted scent blending with the soft patter of rain outside the glass, feeling like I was holding a life no one could intrude on. Every object in the room was something I had assembled, fixed, or chosen myself, paid for with days of work I thought had finally led me to freedom. No more irritated voices, no more eyes heavy with expectations. But then my phone vibrated, each buzz like a needle pricking the calm I had carefully built. And when I picked up, I heard a sound that never came with good news. Isla. My mother's voice trembled through the speaker. I don't know what to do anymore. On the other end, papers rustled sharply, mixed with a strained breath. A late mortgage, utilities shut off, an empty savings account. Evergreen House. The place where Dad Jonas once marked our heights on the kitchen wall was about to be taken by the bank. I gripped the phone, feeling as though someone had tightened a rope around my chest. Can you come home for a while? Her words fell soft yet heavy, like a familiar plea. I knew that feeling too well, and it made it impossible to say no. I turned to look around my apartment, the space that had been proof I'd stepped out of the old cycle. But the image of my mother alone in that big house pulled me back in. 2 days later, I ended my lease. The neighbors smiled at me, thinking I was moving somewhere better. Mother hugged me at the door, eyes red. Delia rushed over and looped her arms around my neck. The first week passed warmly: dinners, thank yous, hugs that felt like they were stitching the old cracks together. I wanted to believe I had come back for love, but deep inside, I knew I was stepping into a role that had never been shared evenly. Then the small signs began to appear. A sigh when I asked about a bill, a frown when I suggested finding a job, a statement left on the table in front of me as if it were obvious. Evergreen House stood still, but my place inside it was no longer the same. I was becoming the quiet bearer of burdens, the unspoken fixer. And the worst part was that I had begun to get used to it, a familiarity that kept me from seeing the trap closing around me. I didn't know that every small gesture was testing how much I could take. And much later, I would realize those signals were the very first warnings I ignored. Warnings strong enough that they would have changed the entire path ahead of me. If only I had stopped sooner. Maybe I would have seen what was waiting behind that door. To understand how that Christmas shattered everything, you need to know how I grew up inside Evergreen House. Evergreen House. When Isla was young, always carried a strange kind of silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of someone afraid to make a sound. I remember the old wooden floorboards creaking under my feet, and how I would try to step lightly so my mother wouldn't frown. Ruth Venn liked everything exactly her way. The curtains had to be drawn at a particular angle, the dishes lined up perfectly, and the older daughter had to behave. Delia was different. She was the light of the house, always praised, always cherished. I didn't hate her. I just learned to shrink so both of them could stay calm. Dad Jonas was the warmest part of the home. He would quietly place a hand on my shoulder whenever I stepped aside to let Delia pass. Isla, you don't have to make yourself smaller. He would say, his voice always carrying the scent of pine because he liked fixing things. But he was too gentle. He saw me folding myself inward, but he didn't know how to help me unfold. From a young age, I understood that in my family, peace only existed when I adjusted myself. Don't cause trouble. Don't need anything. Don't make mom tired. I became the child who did everything: homework, preparing meals, washing my gym shirts, fixing Delia's toys. Every time Ruth said good job, I tried to do better because it was the only way to exist without creating waves. And the worst part was that I started to believe the family's stability depended on me becoming so small I almost disappeared. There were days when I walked through the house for hours, and no one asked where I was, as if I only became visible when someone needed something from me. Sometimes I wondered if I truly vanished. Would anyone notice Evergreen House was beautiful? But beautiful in the way crooked picture frames are beautiful. From afar it looked serene. But up close you could see all the cracks. I grew up on those cracks. And one day, they split open. The first fracture came when I was 13 years old, and it taught me that my efforts would always stand behind someone else's needs. I was 13, preparing for my first science fair. I remember staying up past midnight to finish my miniature ecosystem model. Dad Jonas turned on another lamp for me, placed a cup of warm milk nearby, and said, "I'm proud of you." The next morning, I carried the project downstairs, only to find Delia crying. Ruth turned toward me, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Isla, your sister has to film a promotional video for the school. I need you to give up your competition today." I froze. "But Mom, I already—" "Don't argue. Your sister needs you. You're the older one." My ecosystem model, the one I'd spent a month building, sat on the table, its tiny LED lights still glowing, as if it didn't yet know it was about to be left behind. Delia hugged me, said thank you, and ran after Mom. And I just stood there, staring at my project, like I was watching a piece of my 13-year-old self fall to the floor. That afternoon, Dad found me. He stroked my hair and whispered, "I know you're sad, but you're the strongest one in this family." I wanted to tell him I didn't want to be strong in that way, but I didn't say it. And that was the first time I understood any achievement of mine could be taken away the moment someone needed me to sacrifice for the sake of harmony. But the second injustice was the one that broke the dream I had held for many years. When I was 17, my school offered a summer scholarship program in technology, the thing I had wanted since I was 11. I spent 3 months preparing my application, writing my essay, and building a small project. The day I received the interview invitation, I cried from happiness. That night, when I told my mother, Ruth stayed silent for a few seconds before replying, "Delia needs you at home. She's preparing for a music exam. She can't manage on her own." I stood speechless. "Mom, this is my only chance. You're the older sister. You must sacrifice for the family." Sacrifice, that word slammed shut the door on my dream. Dad Jonas held my hand in the kitchen, his eyes red. "If I could still do more, you wouldn't have to face this choice. but he was getting sicker every day. Ruth leaned on me more and more. Delia knew nothing beyond her own spotlight. I skipped the interview the next morning. That night, I reopened the invitation letter. The paper with the school's logo trembled faintly under the lamp, as if asking whether I dared to choose myself. But the next morning, I folded it and placed it in the bottom drawer. Dad Jonas looked at me for a long time, his eyes so sad I had to turn away. He knew I had just buried my dream, and he also knew I would do it. I understood then my dreams always came after someone else's convenience. And the third injustice was the one that turned me into the lifeline my mother believed she had every right to use. When I was 19, Dad Jonas passed away. The house that had always been quiet now was so silent you could hear the clock ticking. Ruth collapsed as if the world had ended with him. Delia, at 15, turned her grief into an excuse to avoid every responsibility. And I, the one who had just lost my father, became the one carrying both of them. The day I earned my first internship contract at a small IT company in Portland, I thought a new door had opened in my life. I told my mother, hoping for a single congratulatory word, but Ruth simply said no. I can't handle being alone without you in the house. Delia doesn't help with anything. You're not going anywhere. I stood frozen. Mom, I've waited 3 years for this. Then wait longer. I need you. I cried the only time I ever let myself cry in front of her, but Ruth didn't change. The next day, I called the company and declined the offer. That night, standing in the laundry room, listening to the machine hum, I realized, since Dad died, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I had become his replacement. Once, when I said I needed a walk to clear my head, Ruth grabbed my hand not hard, but firmly, as if she was terrified I might step out of the role she had placed on me. Delia simply let me take over everything for her, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I began to feel the house wasn't just large, it was like an invisible locked room, and I was the only one trapped inside it. A role no one ever asked whether I wanted. That was the foundation of the Christmas disaster. I wasn't used just once. I had been trained my entire life to be the one who carries everything. That night, as I sat alone in my old room, I realized the pain didn't begin at the Christmas dinner table. It began in the very place where I was sitting. My old room still smelled faintly of wood and the dried apple sachets my mother used to hang every winter. The small desk, the wobbly wooden chair, the bent desk lamp that had never been fixed. All of it told me one thing. My childhood existed inside a space I was never allowed to expand. Old notebooks lay in the drawer like evidence of a child who learned to stay quiet so no one would be bothered. The posters on the wall were still there, yet I no longer recognized the girl who once put them up. I saw only a version of myself that had shrunk for the sake of the household's peace. I sat at the edge of the bed. Ages 10, 13, 17 returned all at once like a breath held too long. I understood then that Christmas wasn't the first time I had been pushed out. It was the first time I no longer had the strength to return. But the real wound opened when I caught my reflection in the old mirror at the far end of the room. The mirror leaned crookedly against the wall, warped by the years. But that night, when I looked closely, it reflected not just my face, but the shape I had been bent into over so many years. I saw shoulders slightly raised from years of carrying, eyes lowered from years of yielding, a spine curved as if always bracing for the next weight to drop. I stared so long it felt like I was looking at someone else, someone who had been asked to be stronger than her own emotions. And then a sentence entered my mind without permission. Sharp in its truth, I didn't lose myself in one day. I unraveled piece by piece because of the people who called themselves family. I placed my hand against the mirror, cold, smooth, distant, exactly like the way my mother looked at me during Christmas dinner, not as a daughter, but as a resource. Then the recent memories returned small, but cutting. I remembered the morning she called me downstairs just to clean the plates Delia had left behind. The night I was working, and she stood at the doorway blaming the slow internet on all the tech things you brought. The way Delia would ask me to finish her tasks, then turn to smile at Mother as if she were the one carrying the family. Nothing was big enough to be a tragedy, but everything was small enough to wear a person down. I realized the exhaustion didn't come from the tasks. It came from being invisible. Every request, every dismissive glance, every moment they assumed I would handle things as if I had been born to fill whatever empty space they left behind. Burnout doesn't arrive like a blade. It arrives like 1,000 paper cuts wounds so small no one bothers to notice. I understood my family didn't see me. They only saw what I could carry. And the final truth was what sealed my decision to leave. Sitting on that bed, I finally understood the hollowness inside me. My mother didn't see me as a daughter returning home. She saw me as a replacement for my father summoned exactly when she needed reinforcement. I hadn't come home. I had been summoned to clean, to handle, to keep things from falling apart, to continue playing the strongest role in the house, even though no one asked whether I had any strength left. I looked around the room, a place where nothing truly belonged to me. It felt like I was living a life written by someone else. A sentence rose in my mind, calm but razor sharp. If I don't leave this house, I will lose whatever is left of me. I inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, the breath felt like it belonged to me. And in that moment, I knew that Christmas wasn't just an ending, it was the first period in the story of the life I would write for myself. The next morning, everything in Evergreen House looked the same, but I was no longer the person I had been. I woke up with a strange feeling, not sadness, not anger, but something closer to my body deciding on my behalf that this place was no longer home. The early light streamed through the old room, making the dust on the desk sparkle grain by grain. Everything familiar became a reminder I had grown too used to being part of this house without ever truly belonging to it. When I walked downstairs, Ruth was making coffee as usual, her voice light as a passing breeze. Isla, you're up. Good. I need you to clean the living room. I have guests tonight. No glance checking if I was okay. No sign that I had shattered in front of the mirror last night. Delia sat cross-legged on a chair, eyes on her phone, mumbling, "Can you help me find my blue top too? I need it for photos." I stood still. Before, I would have moved automatically, without thinking, without reacting. But this morning, it felt like the house itself had been stripped of its mask. Mother didn't see me. Delia didn't see me. They only saw what I could do for them. And for the first time, I looked at them with my own eyes not softened, not fearful, not minimized. The boundary began to crack when my mother made the most unreasonable request she had ever made. Ruth stepped out of the living room holding a stack of papers. She set them on the table like someone placing down an order. "I invited 3 old friends over tonight. You handle dinner. They love the roasted chicken you make." I inhaled. "Mom, I have extra work scheduled tonight. I can't prepare dinner." The room went silent, as if I had spoken something forbidden. Ruth lifted her face. Not angry, just surprised, as though she were looking at a familiar object that had suddenly broken. "What did you say?" "I can't do it," I repeated. Delia let out a soft laugh, half pity, half disbelief. Isla saying no. That's a first. Ruth set her coffee cup down, harder than necessary. "When did you become so selfish?" I felt my pulse rise to my ears. But my voice stayed even. "Mom, I'm not selfish for refusing to take on things that aren't mine." The air shifted thick, heavy, the moment before a storm. Ruth looked at me as if measuring how far my disobedience could go. The frightening part wasn't her anger, it was her inability to understand why I would dare refuse. Then Delia said something that detonated everything inside my head. As Ruth sharpened her voice, Delia stood up, arms crossed, tilting her head. Mom, she just forgot. She's always done everything since we were little. It's weird she suddenly wants to change. That sentence was the key that unlocked the door I'd been terrified to open. They didn't just expect me to carry everything. They believed it was my nature. No one thought I had a life of my own. No one thought I could be tired. No one thought I had the right to say no. I looked at Delia. She wasn't cruel. She had simply lived too long inside the family narrative my mother created, the one where Isla can handle everything, is always available, always understanding, always sacrificing. The truth slammed into me so fast I had to steady myself with a hand on the table. I wasn't a member of this family. I was the mechanism that kept it functioning. I saw it so clearly it almost hurt physically if I kept living like this. I would grow old in this house, and no one would notice I had been fading the entire time. Ruth called my name, but her voice sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. I looked at my mother and understood this was a loop, and only I could step out of it. And in one very quiet moment, I made the biggest decision of my life. I walked out to the backyard. The Oregon sky was gray and cold. No rain, but the wind was strong enough to make the pine needles on the roof clatter. I stood there, hands in my jacket pockets, breath forming little clouds. No shouting, no tears, just me, and the stillness of someone who finally sees the path ahead. I thought about the motel room from before. I thought about the mornings I brewed my own coffee in the tiny apartment I once had. I thought about my mother's voice today and her voice 10 years ago. Everything blended into one clear sentence: I will leave this house not because they need me this time, but because I need myself. I walked back inside, said nothing, explained nothing. In my mind, a list began forming: what to pack, which accounts to separate, where to stay temporarily, how to leave without creating another storm. I passed the living room, hearing Ruth complain that I had changed. I hadn't changed. I had just woken up. And I didn't know that my silent decision would soon lead to a very public storm, one where the truth would unravel in front of the entire family. Leaving Evergreen House didn't feel like an escape. It felt like finally opening my eyes for real. I closed my bedroom door so gently it barely made a sound. Down in the kitchen, Ruth was still on the phone, and Delia was laughing somewhere in the living room. No one asked why I was carrying a bag down the stairs. It felt as if my disappearing had been natural to them for a long time. Stepping into the front yard, the cold, damp Oregon air settled across my face. I opened the car door, set my bag on the back seat, and sat still for a moment, letting myself feel what it meant to choose me. Not out of impulse, not out of anger, just a clarity I could no longer ignore. The road leaving Lake Oswego was covered in a thin layer of mist. Streetlights reflected through the windshield in long streaks, as if someone was erasing the image of Evergreen House behind me. With every meter I drove, my chest felt lighter. No more mother's sighs. No more Delia calling my name from down the hall. Just the steady hum of the engine, like a different heartbeat returning to me. At the old motel on the outskirts of Portland, I checked in with a strangely steady voice. The room was small, the yellow lighting dim, the bedsheets smelling faintly of industrial detergent. But the moment the door shut, I realized something I hadn't had in years, a space where I was allowed to breathe with my own lungs. But just one day later, I discovered my mother had told the entire family a completely different story. The next afternoon, while I was browsing apartment listings around Portland, my phone buzzed non-stop. The first message was from Delia Chi. Meeting Noiveha Hangla, Chidapdo, Hetland Rabadi, Chi Onju? Sis, Mom is telling the relatives you smashed things, screamed, and stormed out. Are you okay? I sat up straight. Not shocked, just cold. I opened the family group chat messages flooding in. Isla, how could you be disrespectful to your mother? Why did you leave the house in anger? Delia says you scared your mom. I read each line, surprised by how calm I felt. Maybe because I had expected this. My silence had always created space for my mother to write whatever story she wanted. I called Delia. Tell me the truth. Sis, I swear. Mom said you threw dishes, that you stormed out during dinner. Everyone believes it. And you, I, I only said you left. But people believe Mom more, because you never say anything. The last sentence twisted deep inside me. Silence, the thing I used to protect the peace, had become evidence against me. More messages poured in. You need to go back and apologize. Your mother is devastated. No one asked what really happened. No one asked why I left. They just needed a story. And my mother chose the one that cost her the least breath. I put my phone down and understood something painfully clear. If I didn't speak, they would decide who I was for me. If my silence was being used to distort me, then the truth had to be rewritten by my own hand. I opened my laptop under the dim motel light. One key on the keyboard was a bit loose, and the screen reflected my face, tired but defined. Outside, a car rolled across the parking lot stripes, the sound tapping like a countdown to the moment I was about to do something I had never dared to do. I opened my personal page. The blinking cursor felt like an eye urging me to finally speak. I didn't know where to begin, until the first line fell into place on its own. This is the truth about why I left Evergreen House. Every sentence after that felt like it had been pulled out of years of dust inside my chest. I wrote a clear timeline: how I paid the rent, the electricity, the internet, the things I bought, the countless responsibilities I carried. I wrote, on Christmas night, my mother told me I had to leave. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I stood up and did exactly what she said. I kept everything factual, no accusations, no unnecessary emotion, because the truth was heavy enough without decoration. I added, I did not abandon my home. I was asked to leave. I reread the entire post. No shaking, no vindication, just correctness. My hand hovered over the mouse for a few seconds, as if confirming that this was truly me. Isla, the girl who had stayed silent for so many years, finally breaking the thing that bound her. Then I clicked post. No sound filled the room, but I felt something fall off my shoulders, something I had carried so long I didn't realize how heavy it had been. I closed the laptop and leaned against the wall. The air in the room hadn't changed, but I had, for the first time, I didn't feel like someone running away. For the first time, I was someone speaking up. The next morning, my mother's world and the entire family's changed color within minutes. My phone buzzed like it had a fever as soon as the sun rose. I hadn't even opened my eyes when notification after notification lit up the screen. The first message from a cousin I rarely spoke to. Isla, nothing your mother told us matches what you wrote. She told a completely different story. The second, if what you wrote is true, your mother owes you an apology. The third, from Aunt Corinne. Isla, I should have asked you first. I'm sorry. I always sensed something wasn't right. Each message touched old dust inside me, not to hurt, but to sweep things clean. Then Delia called, her voice urgent. Sis, Mom is panicking. She says you're defaming the family. But everyone is siding with you. I've never seen her like this. I stayed silent for a moment, not because I was pleased, but because, for the first time, people were not seeing me through my mother's lens. They were seeing me through my own words. More messages came. Are you okay? Tell us if you need anything. I cried reading your post. I set the phone down and looked out the foggy motel window. The storm of reactions came fast, but inside me, there was an unfamiliar peace, a peace I had never felt inside Evergreen House. I thought everything would stop here, but I was wrong, because that afternoon, My mother appeared at the motel door, not to apologize, but to reclaim the control she believed I owed her. At a certain point, the truth stops knocking, it kicks the door open, and the one who hurts most is the person who tried to hide it. I was making coffee when there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing there, old blue coat, a box of pastries in her hands like some familiar ritual she used whenever she wanted to talk. Her face was gaunt, as if the night had passed without a single hour of sleep. I opened the door just a small crack. "Isla," she said, trying to keep her voice gentle. "I want to talk. Here is fine." She forced a smile, but her eyes didn't follow. "You made the whole family confused. I never wanted you to leave. But you said the words. Clearly." Her smile faltered. "That's not what I meant. Posting it online. You embarrassed me. I only told the truth." Her voice dropped, tone sharpening like a blade. "You have to take the post down." "No." One word, but enough to make her shoulders sink. For the first time, I saw it clearly. My mother wasn't afraid I was wrong. She was afraid of losing control of the narrative. She turned and walked down the long hallway, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. That evening, the family started a group call. I didn't join, but Delia turned the speaker on so I could hear. Corinne began, voice steady. "Ruth, your version and Isla's version are not the same. Why?" My mother gave a thin laugh. "You know how sensitive Isla is?" Martin cut in. "But Isla has proof. Bills, receipts. What about you?" Ruth paused for a beat, then said, "We're family. We shouldn't be dissecting everything like this." Corinne replied, "Family is where honesty matters most." The next question struck the weakest point. "Did you tell Isla to leave that night?" My mother inhaled sharply. "I just wanted a peaceful dinner." "So that means yes," Corinne concluded. No one defended her. She tried to find an exit, but every escape closed under the weight of the truth she had ignored. Delia texted me Jose Roy. "No one believes Mom anymore." They see it now. No one believes Mom anymore. I sat quietly, not triumphant, just feeling something loosen inside my chest, something that had been tightening for years. Then Delia unmuted herself, her voice small but steady. "Mom. She didn't do anything that night. She just stood up." Ruth whipped her head around, eyes widening. "Delia. You?" "I was there," Delia said firmly. "She didn't break anything. She didn't yell. She just endured." Silence. Delia continued. "Since we were little. She did everything for you. You got so used to it you started thinking it was her duty." Ruth's face seemed to collapse. She wasn't used to being confronted, especially by the daughter she always assumed would align with her. "Delia sent me another private message. I'm sorry I didn't understand before. Mom used you more than I realized." My hand froze over the screen. Not because I was surprised, but because, for the first time in my life, someone in the family was actually standing with me. Not because they were convinced, but because they could see finally what I had carried for so many years. At the end of the call, Ruth said softly, "Weakly, I only wanted to keep the family together." Corinne responded, "You don't keep a family together by making things up. Isla didn't attack you. She told the truth." My mother fell silent. Not the manipulative silence she used to twist situations, but the silence of someone who had run out of ways to control the story. Delia lowered her head, and the aunts and uncles began asking what I needed, even though I wasn't present in the call. I sat alone in the motel room, the yellow light casting shadows on the peeling wall. I felt something with absolute clarity. I no longer needed to defend myself. The truth was doing it for me. I turned off the phone speaker. No tears, no trembling, just a deep, quiet ease, as if the space around me had opened a new window. But I didn't know. My mother's silence after that call wasn't surrender. It was just the step back before she returned this time, with a completely different kind of attack. Some apologies aren't meant to heal anything. They're just attempts to pull back the power slipping out of the speaker's hands. Morning in Portland laid a thin layer of fog across the windowsill of my new apartment. I was unpacking the last few items when a knock sounded soft, but familiar enough to make me freeze. Through the peephole, I saw my mother. No pastry box, no forced smile, just tired eyes and a posture trying desperately to stay composed. I opened the door only slightly. "Isla," she said, her voice gentle though not with affection. "I want to talk." I didn't invite her in. The apartment still smelled of paint and freedom, and I didn't want to stain it with haste. "You can talk here," I replied. She glanced down the hallway, as if searching for an invisible witness. There was no one, just the two of us and a distance far wider than the width of the doorway. "I don't want to lose you," Ruth began, but her tone wasn't sad. It sounded more like the fear of someone watching her narrative slip out of her hands. "What you posted, it made people misunderstand me." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my breathing steady. I didn't write anything untrue. I was just under too much pressure. Everyone is blaming me. I can't take it. In her eyes, the real pain wasn't what she had done. It was that other people knew about it. "I understand you're scared," I said, "but fear isn't an excuse for blame." Ruth swallowed. "If you delete the post, we can start over." I shook my head gently. Sunlight stretched across the wooden floor between us, a clear, dividing line. I can't go back to the place where I almost lost myself. "You think you're doing this to punish me?" Ruth whispered. Slowly, I answered, "No, I'm doing this to stop carrying everything." She blinked, as if hearing that truth for the very first time. I continued, "I don't want conflict, but I'm also not going to live a life where I don't have the right to speak." Ruth looked past me into the apartment. "You're not coming home." "No, but we can talk if you're willing to listen, not just control." She clenched her hands, offering no argument. A silence fell, not like the silences she used to manipulate with, but a silence of someone who no longer knew how to hold on. For the first time, I didn't see the woman who dominated every room. I saw someone who didn't know how to keep her child without turning her into a shadow. Ruth turned away without theatrics. She simply said one sentence before stepping into the elevator. "I will try." The doors closed, her reflection fading in the cold metal. I stood there for a few seconds, then went back inside. Morning light spread across the cream-colored walls like a quiet blessing. I set the coffee pot on the stove. No one sighed behind me. No one needed me to rescue them. No one waited for me to do what they considered obvious. Only my own breathing whole, undivided. Some doors don't close because we're cruel. They close because we've finally become brave enough to open the one that belongs to us. After my mother left, the apartment returned to a kind of quiet that felt like the very first breath of morning. A strip of Portland sunlight stretched across the wall, giving the sense that the room was waking up with me. I placed my hand on the kitchen counter, feeling the cold, solid stone, a sensation I never had in a house that was always trembling under expectations, demands, and heavy silences. I looked around a few unopened boxes, a single chair, a warm coffee pot. Everything small, simple, but mine. No one demanding, no one judging, no one needing me to carry their weight. A version of me, the girl who sat at a Christmas dinner table and heard her mother say, "You need to move out," no longer existed. Not because I became stronger, but because I finally understood strength isn't in enduring more. It's in stopping. If you've watched until here, Maybe you've carried the same feeling I carried for so many years. The feeling of having to be the pillar for a family that never actually held you up. The feeling of having to be strong even though no one ever taught you how to be allowed to be weak. The feeling of walking into a room full of people and still feeling alone. I want to tell you this. You are not wrong for setting boundaries. You are not cruel for choosing peace. And you are not selfish for stopping the burden of carrying things that were never yours to carry. Sometimes, family is not where we are seen, but where we learn to truly see ourselves so we can step out. If this story touched you at any point, I sincerely want to hear that. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship, family, romantic, or friendship to find yourself again? Have you ever had to face guilt simply for choosing what was good for you? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Not to seek agreement, but to remind us that we are not alone in this journey. And if you want to keep walking with me through stories of healing, growth, and rediscovering your worth, don't forget to like and subscribe so I can share more meaningful and inspiring stories with you. See you in the next one.